Hey, this is Warren Redlick. I want to talk about something different today. I've been doing a lot of videos about SpaceX and Tesla, and recent videos in particular about self-driving, which relates to artificial intelligence. And I think the artificial intelligence subject in general, including artificial general intelligence, is really fascinating. I watch a lot of videos of people like Lex Fridman talking to people like Daniel Kahneman recently. And I feel like there's something missing in the artificial intelligence community when they talk about intelligence. So I want to get into that. The critical thing that I think is missing is understanding what we can learn from diseases like Alzheimer's, dementia, and other brain disorders. What we can learn about what that means for human intelligence. There's this larger question we've had for thousands of years. What is human intelligence? What is consciousness? What does all that mean? Because if we want artificial intelligence to approximate human intelligence or surpass human intelligence, first we really need to know what is human intelligence. So this is personal for me. My grandmother had Alzheimer's and died pretty much from Alzheimer's. My mother has Alzheimer's now. I have been taking care of my mother. My mother lives in a facility, but I have been her primary, I've been the person primarily responsible for making sure she's taken care of. And I've watched her decline. And it's really striking to see how a person who was extremely intelligent, how that person declines. It's frustrating, of course, it's very depressing. I will tell you there was a moment probably more than a year ago now, where my in-laws were talking about how they met, and then my mother asked me how we met. So imagine that moment when your mother asks you, how did we meet? And you have to explain that you gave birth to me. And I think there's something there. There's something about what Alzheimer's and dementia take away. And what I mean by that, what I mean about what the artificial intelligence community is missing is I'll watch an interview between Lex Fridman and, let's say, Daniel Kahneman, or maybe it was somebody else where they were talking about this. And I've seen this a few times where they'll talk about how a child learns and they'll compare it to how AI learns, in particular, let's say, image recognition. And they'll say, well, you have to show the software 1,000 different images for the software to know what a cat is. You have to show it 1,000 different images of a cat, and after you show it 1,000 different images of a cat, then the software knows what a cat is. And you only have to show a kid a photo of a cat 3 times and a kid knows what a cat is. And, you know, I have kids and I've watched my kids learn these things, and it's not true that kids only see a photo of 3 photos of a cat. You give them a toy that when you press the cow button, it goes moo. When you press the cat button, it goes meow. And those kids play with those things incessantly, and they see lots of different images, and they see a cat and they look at the cat from all different angles. The idea that a child learns that quickly is, I think, false. But anyway, the idea that way we learn about human intelligence is by watching children learn is one angle that makes sense to look at. But there's another angle, which is, what is it that people lose when they start to lose their intelligence? And, you know, what is consciousness? What is self-awareness? And we know that these are things that people with dementia and Alzheimer's lose. So, you know, my mother doesn't really know where she is. I don't think she always knows when she is. Her awareness of, and you know, her self-awareness of her condition. She does not know she has Alzheimer's. She has been diagnosed. She has been in the room with the neurologist when we've talked about the diagnosis. And anytime you tell her she has Alzheimer's, she says, "Oh, I didn't know that," and she's forgotten it, you know, a minute later anyway. And maybe the significance of what it means is not something she understands anymore. And this is a woman who 2-3 years ago was taking me to seminars about Alzheimer's because she feared that it would happen to her because it happened to her mother. So I think it's an important step that I think the artificial intelligence community could take. And when I say this, what I mean is I not only watch a couple videos about Lex Fridman interviewing people, but I actually researched and looked in Google Scholar, looked for articles that talked about this. And it's literally like not in, at least I can't find it, it's not in the artificial intelligence literature. There is no discussion about trying to understand how the brain works by looking at what doesn't work in people with disorders. At least my efforts at finding it, I have not found it. And I think that's a real... And so this relates back to this idea of where is artificial intelligence? Will we achieve artificial general intelligence? And for those who don't know what those terms are, so artificial intelligence is a term that came about decades ago, and there's disputes about whether it's a good term or not. Nobody's found a better one. In today's world, there's a very, I think, more common breakdown between artificial narrow intelligence and artificial general intelligence. Artificial narrow intelligence is a computer that knows how to play chess and uses artificial intelligence techniques like deep learning to play chess better. That is how a computer beat the best Go player in the world. That is how Teslas are learning to drive. They are using deep learning, but it's a narrow. We're just learning a particular task, how to play Go, how to play chess, how to drive a car. It is not a general sense of the world. We don't have artificial general intelligence that can approximate a mouse. I'm not sure we have artificial general intelligence that can approximate an ant. Okay, do we really even know whether an ant is conscious? Does an ant have free will? Or as I just saw somebody talking about it, maybe an ant is to the colony like a neuron is to the brain, and maybe the colony has consciousness. Who knows? We don't really understand these things yet. So artificial general intelligence is the idea that if we could create a machine that was comparable to a mouse, that was able to perceive the world, be aware of where it is, not, there's always that question, do we really understand how mice see the world? But having that level of general intelligence rather than a task-specific intelligence. And then the theory is, well, once we've developed a machine that can develop a mouse intelligence, a couple of years later with our technological improvements, it will achieve dog intelligence. And then a couple of years later than that, or a year later than that, it will achieve monkey intelligence. Somewhere in there's cat intelligence. I'm not sure whether it's higher or lower. That depends on whether you're a cat person or not. And my dog is particularly dumb, and my friend Jeff's dog is particularly smart. So, what the level of dog intelligence is a question. But then there's that, once you achieve chimp intelligence, you're not that far from achieving human intelligence. And once you achieve human intelligence, the next day it's smarter than us. And you end up with this existential question about whether the AI views us as a threat, or hopefully it views us as a pet. And then we use Neuralink to jack into the Borg so we can merge with the AI. There's all kinds of crazy ways of thinking about it. But still, we're a long way from that, we think. I just saw this conversation, I think it was Friedman and Kahneman, where they talked about there's a series of mountains ahead of us. And the answer to artificial intelligence is at the end of the series of mountains. We don't know, we're going over one mountain now, and we know there's one mountain ahead of us that we don't fully understand yet. We don't know how many more mountains there are that we have to cover before we are able to solve the artificial general intelligence problem. Before we're able to create machines that can emulate general intelligence like mice, dogs, humans, etc. So for me, I look at, going back to this question about Alzheimer's dementia, I look back to see, well, what has my mother lost? Is my mother really still conscious? Is my mother intelligent? Because my mother was extremely intelligent. She got a bachelor's degree in a science field when women generally did not get bachelor's degrees. My mother's in her 80s. She was a top bridge player. She read extensively. She was very interested in world affairs. All these, she learned Yiddish at an older age. Just a few years ago, she decided she was going to go drive and meet up with somebody that she'd never met before at a place she'd never been to before, and she was able to do that. And that's when her cognitive abilities were already slightly impaired. So it's important to look at where my mother was, very, very bright, and how much she's lost and how much she doesn't understand. And I think another thing that strikes me when I watch these high-level AI researchers talking to each other, high-level academics talking to each other about human intelligence, these are people who spend most of their time around other people who are highly intelligent, operating at a high cognitive level, thinking about high-level things. And I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and I've been working as a substitute teacher. And so I spend a fair amount of time with people who are not, I don't spend a lot of time with people operating at the same level as academic researchers. And I spend a lot of time with people who don't seem to be thinking as much. If you spend any time with middle school children, a lot of them don't seem to be spending a lot of time thinking. They seem to be spending a lot of time not thinking. If you work with people who are accused of crimes, some of them are actually guilty. My clients, of course, not, but some of them are actually guilty. Even my clients may have made poor decisions. Even my of course, innocent clients may have made some poor decisions. May not have been thinking. You could say they weren't thinking in the right way, but to some extent, maybe they just weren't thinking. So I feel like when academic researchers talk about what human intelligence is, they don't have a lot of exposure to the lower end of human intelligence. They don't see it as much. And I've seen one reference to the village idiot is more intelligent than any monkey, than any ape. I'm not so sure that's true. You know, they certainly have a bigger vocabulary usually than the ape. But do they have wisdom? Do they have judgment? You know, I've seen dogs with better judgment than some people. So I think, you know, what that intelligence is, I think that can be a big question too. So I find that to be a frustrating thing when people were trying to emulate human intelligence. You know, of course, we still, like I said, as a computer level, we haven't emulated mouse intelligence yet, the general concept of intelligence. But in any event, when I read about research about what people lose when they have Alzheimer's or dementia, you know, these things are different. You know, it's not. I don't want to say it's really clear to me what the difference is between Alzheimer's and dementia. I think there's a lot of commonalities. There are some differences, but you'll see that people. I think the average person thinks Alzheimer's is when you start forgetting things, and that's definitely true. And you know, with my mother, we were in the neurologist's office, and the neurologist's assistant was saying something to my mother and trying to persuade my mother to behave in a certain way to improve her condition. And I was thinking, she's not going to remember this conversation by the time we leave the office. Why are you trying to tell my mother what to do? I just know my mother's not going to get that. It's not going to work. I thought it was kind of funny that in a neurologist's office, this person wouldn't know that, but okay. I think there's this question about what do we know? So, and there's all these different specific terms we can look at. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right, but anosognosia is defined as the lack of awareness or the underestimation of sensory, perceptual, motor, affective, or cognitive deficits due to brain damage. That's the idea that my mother doesn't really understand the extent to which she is limited by her disease. She doesn't know she has a disease in the first place. My mother knows that she doesn't remember things well. I don't think she's aware of all the other deficits in her reasoning. Another thing that I don't think people are aware of is people with Alzheimer's and dementia are really good at faking it. This is something I was thinking about when I was going to make this video, is there'll be these moments where somebody who knows my mother sees my mother, or the classic moment that I remember was we were in the car. We were about to go to lunch. We're about to get out of the car to go into the restaurant. And my mom's phone rings. And I can see on her phone that it's her cousin. So she picks up the phone and she goes, "How's by you?" Which is a mannerism, a behavior that my mother had developed over many years or has had since a young age. And I don't believe her cousin knew that my mother didn't know who she was talking to. And every once in a while during the call, my mother would take the phone down and look at the names that were on the screen. And I could tell she didn't know who she was talking to. But she continued to have a conversation. This is really striking, is that I believe that we are all programmed, that we program ourselves, that we are programmed by our environment. If I dribble a basketball, we refer to physical, athletic things that we do as muscle memory. There are a lot of things we do that we refer to as muscle memory, that we do this. Well, then dribbling a basketball isn't really a conscious thing. In fact, we're trying to make it not conscious. When you're driving a car, keeping the car in its lane for an adult experienced driver is not something we think about. We just do it. Maintaining speed is not something we think about. We just do it. We have programmed ourselves in many ways. I find myself, if I'm driving somewhere, when I first get in the car, I know where I'm going. But some other thought pops in my head. So I am thinking, but I end up missing the turn that I meant to take because I was thinking about something else. And apparently I was on autopilot going somewhere else. I didn't make the right turn. I was just going straight because that's how I'm programmed to drive the car when I'm not thinking about where I'm going. And I think we all have that in a whole bunch of different ways. We have programmed responses. If somebody says, "What's up?" we might say, "Sup." You know, there's sort of, if you're Japanese and somebody says, "Ohayo gozaimasu," you might just say "Ohayo gozaimasu" in response. If you're sitting down to dinner, you say, or if you're done with dinner, you say "Gochisousama deshita." There's, when you say grace, you say grace. You don't think about the meaning of grace when you say it. You just say it. So we're all programmed in all ways. And people with Alzheimer's and dementia retain a lot of that programming. They're still able to walk. My mother's walking is clearly impaired. She does not walk the same as she used to. But we see all kinds of deficits. And we still see a lot of the programming. And I feel like that's what's left of my mother, is a lot of the programming and the higher thought that we believe humans are capable of, that we believe we are doing, that you're probably thinking you do when you watch this video, and I think I'm engaged in when I'm making this video. I don't think my mother has that higher level thought at all anymore. But how do you measure that? How do we understand that? This is like a huge step for us. So some other deficits that we see in Alzheimer's and dementia patients. Self-consciousness is the consciousness of one's own mental states. How is that affected by Alzheimer's, dementia, and other diseases? As Anos Nignoshu mentioned, prospective memory, introspection, moral judgments. These are all aspects that researchers have studied in Alzheimer's and dementia and other areas of brain disease that I don't think have been looked at by artificial intelligence researchers to see if that can help us understand the human brain and what we're trying to do in developing artificial general intelligence. One of my frustrations as the child of someone with Alzheimer's is we really can't measure. I feel like we don't have really good ways of measuring the decline. And I think that, again, I really believe this all relates to how we can learn from this to apply it to artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence. But just to go through some examples of things, because people who don't understand Alzheimer's think it's just a matter of forgetting things, there's a lot of different things that come up. So I'll just go through a list of a few things that come up. Some sample things are they mislay items around the house. They forget recent conversations or events. I think those are things that we're not surprised at. They struggle to find the right word in conversation or lose the thread of what is being said. Problems with language itself, language is one of those things we think makes humans special. And I remember another family member had Alzheimer's, and the story I was told was that he was in a nursing home, and he had been born in Germany. After World War II, he had fled to China, lived some time in China, and then came to the U.S. So he knew German first, Chinese second, English third. After a period of time in the nursing home, he stopped speaking English and started speaking in Chinese, and they had to find a staff member who spoke Chinese to communicate with him. A little after that, he stopped speaking Chinese and started speaking German. He regressed, his language ability regressed. Most people don't realize that Alzheimer's affects language. They become slower at grasping new ideas and unwilling to try out new things. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Maybe it comes from that. Maybe that comes from that. They become confused or lose track of the day or date. Yeah, I mean, I think we know, most people are aware of that. They show poor judgment or find it harder to plan or make decisions. Before I moved my mother into this facility, she definitely started to show questionable judgment. She would cross a very busy street in her somewhat impaired physical and mental state. And for not really a very important reason, she would start making decisions I didn't think were wise. She was talking about walking to a store that's a very long walk and not a safe walk where there's no sidewalk on a busy road. That was where I said, okay, I got to move her, and I found the opportunity and I did it. They have problems judging distance or seeing objects in 3 dimensions, navigating stairs or parking their car. My mother actually had issues noticing curb stops when you're in a parking lot and there's a thing that you pull up. Old people apparently tend to trip over these things and hurt themselves. So that's an example. Losing interest in other people or activities. And that's early stage. Becoming confused about where they are, walking off and becoming lost. This is a classic problem with Alzheimer's dementia patients, is that they wander off, and it's why they eventually need to be put in buildings that are locked so they can't get out. Muddling up time and getting up at night because they're mixing up night and day. Behaving in ways that may seem unusual, such as going outside in their night clothes, becoming very agitated, or unknowingly behaving in socially inappropriate ways. My mother will be in a restaurant, my mother will point at somebody and say, wow, she's fat. You know, okay. Shouldn't say that. I've seen my mother do that. Experiencing difficulty with perception, in some case having delusions, strongly believing things that are not true, or less often hallucinations, usually seeing things that are not really there. Later on, some people have difficulty eating, sometimes difficulty swallowing. They suffer considerable weight loss. Although some people eat too much, which is so far my mother and her mother as well. Incontinence, losing control of their bladder and sometimes their bowels as well. My mother will be out to lunch for less than an hour, and my mother will go to the bathroom when we get there, in the middle of lunch and before we leave. I'm not sure if she has to go to the bathroom or she's just not sure. Gradual loss of speech, again, language. These are all deficits. These are all deficits. These are all things that people lose. And again, it's one of my frustrations. We don't really have good ways of measuring the decline. So, you know, my mother's in one form of care right now, and assisted living. And at some point, we're going to want her to move her to memory care. It's not like there's a score from 0 to 100. And when they hit 25, you move them into memory care. It doesn't work that way. And I don't think there's even really good objective measures of any of those deficits that I described. It would be really good if we were able to develop ways of measuring those things. I think if we could do that, we could translate that to a better understanding of how the brain works and how we can apply that understanding of how the brain works to artificial intelligence, to artificial general intelligence. And I could be, look, I'm not an artificial intelligence programmer. I don't work in the field. I'm just somebody who's fascinated by it and hope we can get somewhere with it. To me, building artificial intelligence should not depend solely on knowing what the brain does well. It's important to know what happens when the brain doesn't work well. And that may help us understand how the brain works. It may help us do that better and then develop artificial. It may help us understand where those mountains are that are coming. You know, we're coming over this mountain right now where we're learning how to do deep learning and use neural networks to do pattern recognitions and other things like that. And we don't know how far that will take us. We're pretty sure there's another mountain on the other side of this mountain. There's probably at least one more mountain after that. Understanding these problems in the way broken brains don't work may help us develop the artificial general intelligence we're hoping for in the future, because we can see the hurdles that we should have to overcome that are natural. If we're trying to build something like the brain, we should know how the brain malfunctions. And then maybe we'll see that when we're developing artificial and general intelligence, we'll be able to work around it. And I think I didn't want to do this video without mentioning, I'm very excited about Neuralink. I'm an Elon Musk fan. If you watch my videos, you know that. And I think there's hope that we will be able to use Neuralink to measure what is going on in the brains of people who have Alzheimer's. And that will help us understand these cognitive deficits that people experience when they have Alzheimer's, dementia, or other brain diseases. And maybe that learning will go back and forth. We'll learn more about how the brain doesn't work when it's not working properly, and we'll be able to use that to enhance how we design artificial general intelligence. And of course, the dream, and being somebody with a parent and a grandparent who've had Alzheimer's, I'm at high risk for Alzheimer's. My children are at risk for having Alzheimer's. I am hopeful that we come up with something to address this, because there's another thing people don't seem to know: the drugs don't work. We spend, this is my opinion, okay, it's just my opinion, the drugs don't work. They certainly didn't work for my mother. They may help some people a little bit here and there. They do not prolong the time before you have to go into a nursing home. They do not increase life expectancy. They do not reduce mortality. They may maybe they're just placebos. I don't know. They're very expensive placebos. We don't really have good treatment for Alzheimer's or dementia yet. None. Maybe some rare exceptions, but generally speaking, we don't have any treatment. And I am very hopeful that Neuralink will make progress, that we will learn about the brain's dysfunction, and we will learn how to fix it as a result of what we learned from Neuralink. So I think I've run out of steam for this, and I hope to interview at least one person in the future and have at least one more conversation on this topic. But I'd like to hear what you think. So in the comments below here, please, what are your thoughts on Alzheimer's? What are your thoughts about how it relates to artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence? Please let me know in the comments, and let's have a conversation. I respond to comments. We could have a really good conversation about this. And your comments often help me decide what my next video is going to be, or inspire me for my next video. So thank you very much for watching. And if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe and check out my other videos. Thanks very much.